Marcus Williams, at 38 years old, believed in the steady rhythm of life. He believed in the hum of a well-maintained server, the satisfaction of code compiling without a single error, and the quiet love that builds over a decade of shared takeout containers and folded laundry. His salary as a senior IT consultant for a downtown Chicago firm was a respectable $72,000 a year, enough for the life he and his wife Vanessa had built. It was a life measured in the worn comfort of their two-bedroom apartment in South Shore, the reliable rumble of their 2012 Toyota Camry with 187,000 miles on it, and the shared dream of one day buying a small house with a yard. On a Tuesday in October at 6:47 p.m., that steady rhythm shattered. The rain outside was a cold, persistent drizzle, tapping against the windows of their third-floor walk-up. Marcus had just gotten home, his shoes leaving damp prints on the welcome mat. He was thinking about the leftover chili in the fridge and the new season of the show they were watching together. Then he saw it on the small wooden table by the door, propped against a vase of wilted hydrangeas. A certified mail envelope, stiff and official. His name was typed in stark black letters. He picked it up, his thumb tracing the sharp edge. It felt heavier than paper. Inside, a sheaf of documents was held together by a large metal clip. The top page read, "In the Circuit Court of Cook County, Illinois Domestic Relations Division." Below that, in bold, "Petition for dissolution of marriage." The words didn't compute. Dissolution of marriage. He read it again and again. His breath caught in his chest, a sharp, painful snag. He scanned the pages, his eyes jumping over the dense legal text, searching for a mistake, an explanation. He found Vanessa's name as the petitioner and his as the respondent. Then he saw the date of filing. It was dated the previous Friday, the day after her aunt's estate had finally cleared probate, the day a $1 million inheritance had been wired into an account bearing her name only. He sank onto the arm of their worn, $900 Ashley furniture sofa, the papers trembling in his hand. 10 years. A decade of his life, of their life, reduced to this cold, formal petition. He had supported her through her master's degree, celebrated her promotions, held her when her aunt passed away 6 months ago. He'd spent countless hours helping her and her mother sort through the complicated estate, organizing documents, dealing with lawyers, all while running his own consulting job and nurturing a secret project he believed would be their future. He had thought they were a team. He had thought they were building a life. He looked around the living room they had so carefully curated on a budget. The $300 IKEA bookshelf he'd assembled one frustrating Saturday, now filled with her art history texts and his programming manuals. The framed print of a Chicago skyline they'd bought at a street festival for $50. Every object was a memory, a testament to a partnership he now realized had been a complete fiction to one of them. The devastating truth landed with the force of a physical blow. The money had arrived, and he had been summarily dismissed. He was an expense she had finally decided to cut. He had no idea then how calculated, how cruel this dismissal would become. And she had no idea that the man she was casting aside as a $72,000 a year consultant had just 6 weeks prior quietly become a multi-millionaire. The game she was starting was one she could not possibly win. We need your support to keep telling stories like Marcus's. If you believe in justice and the power of quiet strength, please consider subscribing to the Love Beyond Pride channel. Your click helps us share more tales of resilience and vindication. Their life had been a tapestry woven from modest threads. Marcus remembered the day they moved into the South Shore apartment 10 years ago. It was July, hot and sticky. The rent was $800 a month, a stretch for them back then. They'd painted the living room a soft gray themselves, getting more paint on their clothes than on the walls, laughing until their sides hurt. Their first big purchase was a queen-sized mattress from a discount store, a $450 investment that felt like the height of luxury after years on a lumpy futon. Vanessa had always had expensive taste, a yearning for the gleaming towers of the Gold Coast she could see from the lakefront path. "One day, Marcus," she'd say, her eyes fixed on the distant glass and steel, "we'll have a view like that. No more sirens. Just the lake." He'd squeeze her hand, sharing the dream but grounded in their reality. For him, the dream was less about the view and more about the security it represented. He worked his 9 to 5, then came home and poured another 6 hours into his own project, a niche SaaS platform for managing logistics and small-scale manufacturing. He called it SyncFlow. He built it line by line in the small office nook they'd created in their second bedroom, fueled by cheap coffee and a belief in its potential. Vanessa was vaguely supportive, in the way one is supportive of a hobby. "That's nice, honey," she'd say, peering over his shoulder, before turning her attention back to a catalog for a $3,000 Italian leather sofa. "Don't stay up too late." She never asked about the specifics: the user acquisition costs, the churn rate, the server uptime. To her, it was just Marcus's little computer project. His world of code was as foreign and uninteresting to her as her world of art gallery openings and fashion blogs was to him. He thought their differences were a charming balance. He now saw they were a chasm. They lived a life of careful budgeting. Dinners out were a monthly treat, usually at a local Thai place where they could get 2 entrees and an appetizer for under $60 with tip. Their biggest splurge was a trip to New Orleans for their 5th anniversary, a long weekend that cost them nearly $1,500, which they'd saved for over a year. Marcus remembered Vanessa's face as she looked at the wrought iron balconies of the French Quarter. "This is history," she'd whispered. "This is real." It was the same look she had when she talked about the Gold Coast, a look of longing for something more, something he was beginning to realize he was not a part of. When her Aunt Clara passed, leaving Vanessa as the sole heir to her surprisingly large estate, things began to shift in ways Marcus didn't recognize until it was too late. The inheritance was tied up in probate, but the knowledge of it hung in the air between them. It was a $1 million promise. Vanessa started spending more time with her mother, their conversations becoming hushed whispers when he entered a room. She bought a new laptop, a $1,800 MacBook Pro, to help manage the estate, she'd said. She started talking about financial advisors and investment portfolios with a fluency that surprised him. "We need to be smart about this, Marcus," she said one evening, scrolling through a wealth management website. "This money is a chance to build a real future." "I thought we were already building one," he'd replied, gesturing around their apartment. She'd given him a pitying look, her lips pressed into a thin line. "This is a good start," she'd said, her tone condescending, "but it's time to level up. You wouldn't understand the kind of pressure this is." He had no idea that her vision of leveling up was a solo venture. He was the past, the starter home, the reliable but unexciting sedan she was about to trade in for a sports car. And he was still dutifully working on SyncFlow, which had just received a quiet, unsolicited acquisition offer from a major tech firm in Silicon Valley. An offer that started at 8 figures. He hadn't told her yet. He was waiting for the money to be in the bank. He wanted to surprise her, to hand her the Gold Coast life she'd always dreamed of, proving that he, her steady, unglamorous husband, could be her real future after all. What he didn't know was that she had already scheduled his obsolescence. The first phone call was 3 days after he'd been served. He had spent those 3 days in a fog of disbelief, wandering through the apartment that now felt like a museum of a dead relationship. He'd called her phone a dozen times, each call going straight to her voicemail. Finally, on Friday afternoon, she picked up. "Marcus," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of any warmth. It was the voice of a business associate, not a wife. "V, what is this?" he asked, his own voice cracking. "Divorce? Why didn't you talk to me?" There was a sigh on the other end of the line, a sound of profound impatience. "There's nothing to talk about. It's done. I've moved on." "Moved on? We're married. We have a life, a home." He heard a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound he'd never heard from her before, and it sliced right through him. "Marcus, please, don't be so dramatic. We had an arrangement that worked for a while. Now it doesn't. I have this inheritance, and it's a chance for me to start my real life, a life you were never going to be able to give me." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. The life I couldn't give you? I've been working my tail off for us? That project I've been working on for years? "Oh, that little computer thing?" she interrupted, her tone dripping with disdain. "That was never going to amount to anything. Let's be realistic. You make $72,000 a year. That's a fine life for some people." "It's not the life I want." The conversation ended with her telling him her lawyer would be in touch. He was left holding a dead phone. The silence in the apartment pressing in on him. The woman he loved, the woman he had shared his deepest hopes with, had just dismissed his life's work as a little computer thing. The outrage began to smolder beneath his grief. A week later, the second blow landed. It came in the form of a phone call from Vanessa's mother, Brenda. She was a woman who had always treated Marcus with a kind of polite condescension, as if he were a piece of furniture Vanessa had picked up at a thrift store. "Marcus, I'm calling to make sure you're not going to make this difficult for Vanessa," she began, her voice smooth and imperious. "Difficult?" he echoed, stunned. "She's divorcing me without a word, Brenda. What do you expect?" "I expect you to be a gentleman," she said coolly. "Vanessa is moving into a different world now. She has opportunities. That $1 million is just the start. She'll be meeting new people, important people. You were always a placeholder, Marcus, a starter husband. You served your purpose. You gave her a stable place to be while she figured things out. But her destiny is bigger than all this." She didn't have to say what all this was. He could hear it in her voice, his job, his apartment, his life. Him. "A starter husband," he repeated, the words tasting like ash. "You were always temporary." The line had been drawn directly from Brenda's mouth. It wasn't just Vanessa's idea. It was a family plan. He had been a phase, a stepping stone on their path to wealth, and his expiration date had finally arrived. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest. He thought of all the holidays he'd spent with her family, the polite smiles, the empty praise. It had all been a lie. The final escalation came via email. It was from Vanessa's lawyer, a man named Richard Klein, from a shark-like downtown firm. The email was blunt. It informed him that Ms. Williams had filed a motion to freeze all their marital assets to prevent him from dissipating them. Attached was a financial disclosure form that Vanessa had signed. It listed their joint assets, the 2012 Toyota Camry, valued at a generous $4,500, a joint checking account with a balance of $1,732.58, and their rented apartment's security deposit of $800. That was it. Missing from the list was their joint savings account at a different bank, which held $12,450 they had painstakingly saved over 5 years. Missing was the small E-Trade portfolio they'd started with a tax refund, now worth just over $8,300. It wasn't a fortune, but it was theirs. And she had hidden it. The email went on to state that since her inheritance was legally non-marital property, and their joint assets were so meager, she was demanding he vacate their shared apartment within 30 days so she could liquidate its contents, their furniture, their books, their life, to cover her legal fees. He was being erased. She wasn't just leaving him. She was trying to leave him with nothing, building a legal case on the lie that he was not only a low earner, but also had no claim to the small nest egg they had built together. She was trying to make him destitute to strengthen her position. That was her second and most critical mistake. The smoldering outrage in Marcus's chest ignited into a cold, clear flame. The grief was still there, but now it had a new companion: resolve. She thought she was playing chess with a pawn. She was about to find out she was facing a king. The law office of Adebayo and Associates was on the 45th floor of a glass tower on Wacker Drive, with a panoramic view of the Chicago River. The space was modern and minimalist, all clean lines and cool tones. It was a world away from Marcus's life in South Shore. He felt out of place in his $120 department store blazer, acutely aware of the scuff on his shoe. The consultation fee alone was $500, and Ms. Adebayo's hourly rate was $650. The numbers made his stomach clench. It was money he didn't think he had. Zara Adebayo was a tall, elegant black woman in her late 40s. Her hair was styled in intricate, silver-threaded twists, and she wore a sharp, tailored suit that probably cost more than his monthly rent. She moved with an unhurried grace that radiated confidence. She listened without interruption as Marcus laid out the story, his voice quiet as he described the divorce papers, the phone calls, the email from Vanessa's lawyer. He slid the documents across the polished mahogany desk. Miss Adebayo put on a pair of sleek, black-framed reading glasses and began to read. Her expression was neutral, her focus absolute. She spent several minutes reviewing Vanessa's petition and the attached financial disclosure. The only sound in the room was the soft rustle of paper and the distant hum of city traffic below. Finally, she looked up, her dark eyes sharp and intelligent. "Mr. Williams," she began, her voice calm and measured, "your wife's legal strategy is both common and remarkably foolish. It's a classic poverty plea." She tapped a manicured finger on Vanessa's financial affidavit. She is attempting to establish a narrative. She is the victim, a woman saddled with a low-earning husband. Her inheritance is her righteous escape, and the marital assets are so negligible that you are entitled to virtually nothing. She wants a quick, clean extraction where she keeps her million and walks away, leaving you with half of a 10-year-old car. Ms. Adebayo leaned back in her high-backed leather chair, a $4,000 Herman Miller model. However, she has made a significant error. She swiveled her monitor to face him, showing him the document on the screen. She has declared, under penalty of perjury, that this is a complete and accurate list of your joint assets. She pointed to the short list: the car, the checking account. You mentioned a savings account and a stock portfolio? Yes, Marcus said. About $12,000 in savings and $8,000 in stocks. And you are joint owners on these accounts? Yes, we opened them together. A slow, knowing smile touched Ms. Adebayo's lips. It didn't reach her eyes, which remained focused and intense. Then your wife has committed perjury. She has filed a fraudulent document with the court. This is not a small thing, Mr. Williams. This is the kind of mistake that can cause an entire case to collapse. It speaks to intent. The intent to defraud not only you, but the court itself. Marcus felt a strange mix of vindication and dread. So what does that mean? It means we have leverage. She paused, her gaze steady. But leverage costs money. A battle like this against a firm like Klein and Partners will be expensive. Her $1 million inheritance gives her a significant war chest. We would need to file our own petitions, subpoena the bank records, Prove she is lying? It could cost you upwards of $50,000 in legal fees, and the assets you're fighting over are only worth $20,000. The air went out of Marcus's lungs. $50,000. He might as well have been trying to reach the moon. He shook his head, a wave of despair washing over him. I can't afford that. I make $72,000 a year. I don't have that kind of money. He looked down at his hands, feeling the trap close around him. Vanessa knew he couldn't afford to fight. That was the whole point. She would get away with it. Mr. Williams, Ms. Adebayo said gently, is there anything else? Any other asset? No matter how small? Anything she might not know about? Marcus took a deep breath. This was it, the moment of truth. He had been holding this card so close to his chest, waiting for the perfect moment to play it. He had imagined revealing it to Vanessa over a celebratory dinner, watching her eyes light up as he told her all their financial worries were over forever. Now he was revealing it in this sterile office to a woman he'd just met, to save himself from financial ruin. Yes, he said, his voice barely a whisper, there is one other asset. He pulled out his phone, his fingers surprisingly steady. He opened his personal email, found the message he had saved, and turned the phone toward her. It was from a corporate mergers and acquisitions lawyer, dated 6 weeks prior. The subject line was Confirmation of Wire Transfer, SyncFlow Acquisition. Ms. Adebayo leaned forward, her eyes narrowing to read the small text. She saw the name of the acquiring tech giant. She saw the name of Marcus's LLC. And then she saw the number. A long string of digits with 2 commas. $20,147,352.18. The silence in the office was absolute. Ms. Adebayo slowly leaned back in her chair. The professional mask fell away for just a second, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated astonishment. Her mouth opened slightly. She looked from the phone to Marcus and back to the phone, as if to confirm what she was seeing was real. Then, the slow, knowing smile returned. But this time it was different. It was wide, and it was brilliant. It was the smile of a predator that has just seen its prey wander into a perfectly laid trap. Mr. Williams, she said, her voice a low, thrilling hum of excitement. Forgive my language, but you have just handed me a tactical nuke. We are no longer discussing a $50,000 legal battle over a savings account. She stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city below. Your wife has built her entire case on the premise that you are poor. She has lied, under oath, to reinforce that premise. We are going to let her continue. We will let her lawyer file more motions. We will let her testify in a deposition. We will let her dig her own grave deeper and deeper with every legal document she signs. She turned back to him, her eyes gleaming. And at the moment of maximum impact, in a formal mediation where she cannot run or hide, we are going to detonate this information. We are not just going to win this case, Mr. Williams. We are going to annihilate it. She picked up her pen. My retainer is $10,000. I suggest you pay it from an account your wife knows nothing about. For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt the weight on his chest lift. He wasn't a victim anymore. He was a strategist, and the game was just beginning. The plan required one thing from Marcus above all else: absolute restraint. He had to become a ghost, a man defeated, while Ms. Adebayo built their fortress of evidence in the background. Every interaction with Vanessa was a performance, a carefully scripted scene, in a play only he and his lawyer knew the ending to. It was the hardest acting job of his life. 2 weeks after hiring Ms. Adebayo, he received a text from Vanessa. It was the first direct communication he'd had from her since their brutal phone call. Have you found a new apartment yet? My lawyer says we need to set a date for you to be out. The 30th is the final day. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. His first instinct was to unleash the fury and pain that had been simmering inside him. Instead, he channeled the character he was supposed to be. The broke, downtrodden husband. Him, still looking. It's hard to find anything I can afford on my own. The deposits are killer. He sent the text from the balcony of a $3.5 million condominium he was touring in the Gold Coast. The realtor, a polished woman named Carol, was inside describing the Sub-Zero refrigerator and the Italian marble countertops. The view of Lake Michigan was breathtaking. Her. That's not my problem, Marcus. You need to figure it out. I need to get the apartment cleared out so I can sell the furniture. Him. Our furniture. V. We picked all that out together. Her. And now I'm selling it. I'll have my lawyer send you a check for your half after expenses. Don't expect much. He put the phone down, his hand clenched into a tight fist. He took a deep breath of the cold lake air, picturing Ms. Adebayo's face. Let her dig, she had said. Every cruel text, every dismissive word was another shovelful of dirt. A few days later, he staged his most difficult performance. He called her. He let his voice sound strained, desperate. V, it's me, he started. What do you want, Marcus? She answered, her voice sharp with annoyance. I need a favor. I know this is a lot to ask, but I'm really in a bind. I can't get enough for a security deposit and first month's rent anywhere decent. I was wondering if you could maybe lend me a little from the inheritance. Just a couple thousand. I'll pay you back, I swear. There was a moment of dead silence on the line. He could almost hear her processing the audacity of his request. Then came the laugh, the same cold, sharp sound from before, but this time it was laced with genuine amusement. You cannot be serious, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. You want me to give you money? My inheritance? Marcus, that money is for my future, a future that doesn't include bailing you out. You're a grown man. Get a second job. Find a roommate. Move in with your cousin in Joliet. I don't care. But you are not touching a single cent of my money. This is exactly why I'm divorcing you. This dependency. It's pathetic. It was just a question, he mumbled, playing the part of the humiliated man. And it was a pathetic one, she snapped. Don't call me for money again. Let the lawyers handle everything. She hung up. Marcus slowly lowered the phone. He felt a cold calm settle over him. Dependency. Pathetic. He saved the recording of the call, just as Ms. Adebayo had instructed. He forwarded the text exchange to her. Each piece of her cruelty was another exhibit, another nail for the coffin she was building for herself. While Marcus played the pauper, Ms. Adebayo was a whirlwind of strategic action. She filed a response to Vanessa's petition, a deliberately weak-looking document that conceded nothing but asked for very little. It was designed to make them believe Marcus was represented by an overworked, underfunded lawyer. She complied with their requests for his financial information, providing his W-2 from his $72,000 a year job, and his bank statements showing a meager balance, all from before the acquisition. The SyncFlow money was sitting silently in a new corporate entity, legally distinct and invisible to them. The most critical step was the deposition. Ms. Adebayo insisted they depose Vanessa. It was an expensive move, costing over $5,000 for the court reporter and her time, but it was essential. They needed Vanessa's lies on the record, under oath. The deposition took place in Richard Klein's conference room. Vanessa arrived looking radiant, wearing a cream-colored silk blouse that probably cost $500. She was confident, almost smug. Marcus was not present. Ms. Adebayo had insisted he stay away. For 3 hours, Ms. Adebayo questioned Vanessa with a soft, almost gentle touch. She asked about the marriage, their lifestyle, their finances. Vanessa painted a picture of herself as a long-suffering wife, held back by her husband's lack of ambition. "And to be clear, Ms. Williams," Ms. Adebayo said toward the end, her tone mild, "the financial affidavit you filed with the court, which I have here as Exhibit C, lists all of the marital assets you are aware of?" "Yes, that's correct," Vanessa said, her posture perfect. "So, no other bank accounts? No savings? No investment vehicles?" Richard Klein shifted in his seat, but Vanessa was unflappable. "No. What's on that paper is everything. We didn't have much." "And you are certain of that?" Ms. Adebayo pressed gently. "You understand you are under oath?" "I'm certain," Vanessa said, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. Ms. Adebayo smiled faintly. "Thank you, Ms. Williams. No further questions." The trap was set. The bait had been taken. The perjury was now formally on the record, transcribed and certified. All that was left was to spring it. They agreed to a formal mediation in 2 weeks' time, a final attempt to settle before going to court. Vanessa and her lawyer, confident they had a slam-dunk case against a broke and desperate man, readily agreed. They had no idea they were walking into an execution. The mediation was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a bright, cold Wednesday morning. The location was a neutral third-party office in the Loop, a suite of conference rooms designed to feel calming, with beige walls and generic landscape art. The atmosphere, however, was anything but. Marcus arrived with Ms. Adebayo at 9:50 a.m. He wore a simple, dark gray suit he'd bought for $400 at Men's Warehouse years ago, but it was perfectly tailored. He wore his $89 Timex watch. He felt a strange sense of calm, the adrenaline of the past few months having settled into a solid core of resolve. He was ready. Vanessa and her lawyer, Richard Klein, were already in the conference room. Vanessa was wearing a sharp, black power dress that looked like it cost at least $1,500. On her wrist was a new watch, a gold Cartier, that Marcus knew retailed for over $7,000. She was glowing with confidence, her deep brown skin radiant against the stark black of her dress. She gave Marcus a brief, dismissive glance, then turned to speak to her lawyer in a low voice. Klein, a man with silver hair and a permanent smirk, nodded at them curtly. The mediator, a retired judge named Arthur Bell, entered and laid out the ground rules. The goal was to find a resolution. He urged them to be open and honest. Marcus had to suppress a bitter laugh. Klein spoke first. He laid out their case with theatrical gravity. He painted Marcus as an under-earning, financially dependent husband. He spoke of Vanessa's newfound inheritance as her one chance to escape a decade of stagnation. He presented her fraudulent financial affidavit as fact. As you can see, Klein concluded, gesturing toward the document, the marital estate is negligible. A 2012 Toyota Camry, a small checking account. Mr. Williams's income is, to be frank, insufficient to maintain a separate household without significant support. However, my client, in a show of good faith, is willing to let him keep the vehicle, valued at $4,500, and waive any claim to the furniture in the apartment. In return, Mr. Williams will waive any and all claim to spousal support, now and in the future. Given the circumstances, this is a more than generous offer. The mediator turned to Marcus and Ms. Adebayo. Ms. Adebayo, your response? Zara Adebayo smiled, a slight, dangerous curve of her lips. She placed a slim, leather-bound binder on the polished table. It landed with a soft, definitive thud. Thank you, Mr. Bell. We appreciate Mr. Klein's creative narrative. However, before we discuss the generosity of my client's wife, we have a few discrepancies to address regarding her filings. She opened the binder. First, let's talk about the assets Ms. Williams seems to have forgotten. I have here a certified statement from Harris Bank for a joint savings account number ending in 4821 in the names of Marcus and Vanessa Williams. As of the date of filing, the balance was $12,450.22. She slid a copy across the table. Klein's smirk faltered. He glanced at Vanessa, whose eyes had widened slightly. And, Ms. Adebayo continued, her voice smooth as silk, a statement from E-Trade for a joint brokerage account. As of the same date, its value was $8,312.90. These are marital assets totaling over $20,000 that Ms. Williams swore, under oath in her deposition last week, did not exist. Vanessa's face began to pale. The confident glow was gone, replaced by a waxy sheen. I forgot about those, she stammered, looking at her lawyer for help. Klein cleared his throat. A simple oversight, Your Honor. An administrative error. We can amend the filings. An oversight? Miss Adebayo repeated, letting the word hang in the air. A $20,000 oversight. Interesting. But that's not the most significant oversight we've discovered. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a second, much thicker binder. This one was labeled SyncFlow LLC Acquisition. She placed it on the table with a solid, heavy thwack that made Vanessa jump. You see, Ms. Adebayo said, her voice dropping, becoming arrestingly quiet, my client has been accused of being a low-earning, dependent husband. His wife has called his work a little computer thing that was never going to amount to anything. She has called his financial situation pathetic. She has built her entire legal and moral argument on this foundation. She opened the binder. 6 weeks before Ms. Williams filed for divorce, my client, Marcus Williams, finalized the sale of his little computer thing, a SaaS company called SyncFlow, to Oracle Corporation. She paused, letting the name Oracle land. Klein's jaw went slack. The final sale price, Ms. Adebayo announced, her voice clear and precise in the dead silent room, was $20,147,352. She slid a copy of the final wire transfer confirmation across the table. It stopped directly in front of Vanessa. The color drained completely from Vanessa's face. She stared at the paper, her eyes scanning the numbers, her brain refusing to process them. 20 million. She looked from the paper to Marcus, her mouth hanging open. The man she had just tried to shame into borrowing a few $1,000s from her. The man she had called temporary. He met her gaze. His expression was not triumphant, not angry, not sad. It was nothing. A complete and total blank. It was the calm, detached expression of a surgeon who has just completed a complex and difficult procedure. Vanessa's hands began to shake. A single, choked sound escaped her throat. Her lawyer, Richard Klein, looked as if he had been struck by lightning. He stared at the document, then at Ms. Adebayo, then back at his client. He saw not just the collapse of his case, but the specter of sanctions, of a bar investigation, of abject professional humiliation. This is marital property, he stammered, his mind racing. Half of this is it, Ms.? Adebayo interrupted, her voice like ice. The offer was made and accepted before your client filed for divorce, but the funds were wired to a new corporate account held solely by Mr. Williams after she had already filed her fraudulent petition. We contend that her actions, her demonstrable fraud and perjury, her bad faith filing, nullify her claim to this asset, but we are, of course, willing to let a judge decide that. A judge who will first review Exhibit A, the fraudulent filing, Exhibit B, the deposition where your client committed perjury, and now Exhibit C, the $20 million asset she knew nothing about because she held her husband and his work in such utter contempt. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on Vanessa. Your client came here today with a generous offer. My client gets a 10-year-old car, and she walks away with her $1 million inheritance. We have a counter offer. Your client will dismiss her petition for divorce with prejudice. She will sign a full waiver of any claim, now or in the future, to any proceeds from the sale of SyncFlow. She will be solely responsible for her own, very substantial legal fees. In return, Mr. Williams will not pursue criminal charges for perjury, nor will he file a civil suit for fraud. He will let her keep what's left of her inheritance. He will walk away. That is our offer. It is on the table for the next 5 minutes. The room was a tomb. Vanessa was staring at Marcus, her eyes wide with a dawning, cosmic horror. She had thrown away a king because she thought he was a pawn. She had traded a $20 million partnership for a $1 million payday. And in her greed and cruelty, she was about to lose it all. The collapse was swift and total. The mediation ended without another word from Vanessa or her lawyer. Klein, his face ashen, simply nodded his acceptance of Ms. Adebayo's terms and quickly guided his shell-shocked client out of the room. The war was over. The consequences were just beginning to cascade. The first consequence was legal. Within 48 hours, Vanessa's petition for divorce was dismissed with prejudice, meaning she could never file for divorce against Marcus on the same grounds again. She signed the waiver, a thick document that relinquished any and all claim to the SyncFlow fortune. The cost for this catastrophic legal failure, billed by the now furious Richard Klein, came to $38,750. The bill arrived in a cold, stiff envelope, the first withdrawal from her precious inheritance. The second consequence was professional. Ms. Adebayo, as a matter of professional ethics, was required to note the filing of fraudulent documents in the case dismissal. While Marcus had agreed not to press charges, the court itself took notice. The judge referred Vanessa's case to the Cook County State's Attorney's Office for review of perjury. Though they ultimately declined to prosecute, the investigation itself was terrifying and costly. Vanessa had to hire a criminal defense attorney at a cost of $75,000 to navigate the inquiry. That single act of hiding a $12,000 savings account had now cost her over $113,000. The third consequence was financial, and it was brutal. The court's notice of the fraudulent filing triggered an automatic flag with the Illinois Department of Revenue and the IRS. Both agencies launched audits into Vanessa's finances. They quickly discovered the undeclared joint assets and the premature gift of $50,000 she had given her mother. The state and federal governments assessed back taxes, penalties for fraud, and interest charges that totaled a staggering $48,200. They also clawed back the $50,000 gift from her mother, who was forced to liquidate her own investments to pay it back, creating a bitter rift between mother and daughter. The dream team that had plotted Marcus's removal was now mired in mutual resentment and financial strain. The voicemails began the evening of the mediation. They were a real-time chronicle of Vanessa's descent. The first, at 7:15 p.m., was angry and confused. Marcus, what the hell was that? $20 million? You have to call me. You can't just hide something like that. This is insane. We need to talk. The second, at 9:42 p.m., was pleading, the anger replaced by a dawning panic. Okay, look, I'm sorry. I was overwhelmed. The money, my mom in my ear. I made a mistake, a huge mistake. But this doesn't have to change everything, does it? We can fix this. Please, Marcus, call me. The third came after midnight, at 1:28 a.m. It was a choked, desperate whisper. My lawyer called. He's dropping me. He said I could be charged with perjury. Marcus, they could take my inheritance to pay for all this. They could take everything. You wouldn't let that happen, would you? Please, just tell them it was a misunderstanding. I'm begging you. The final message was logged at 3:47 a.m. It was just the sound of ragged, uncontrollable sobbing, a long, painful wail of self-inflicted loss that went on for nearly 2 minutes before the line went dead. Marcus listened to each one, not with satisfaction, but with a profound and heavy sadness. This was the sound of a person's character collapsing under the weight of her own choices. The fourth consequence was social. The dream of a Gold Coast condo and a life among Chicago's elite evaporated, with her inheritance dwindling rapidly to cover legal fees and tax penalties. She was left with less than half of the original million. The story of the divorce, in its most humiliating version, inevitably leaked through the legal community. She was no longer a tragic heiress, but a cautionary tale of greed. The important people she and her mother had been so eager to meet were nowhere to be found. By the time the dust settled 6 months later, Vanessa's $1 million dream had been decimated. After all was said and done, she was left with roughly $410,000. It was a substantial amount of money, but it was a bitter pittance compared to the fortune she had thrown away. She couldn't afford the Gold Coast. She couldn't even afford a nice condo in a decent neighborhood. She ended up renting a small, one-bedroom apartment in Rogers Park, a place smaller and less charming than the home she had shared with Marcus. She had to sell the $7,000 Cartier watch to make the deposit. The great leveling up had resulted in a devastating fall, from a height she had never actually reached. She was alone, surrounded by the wreckage of her own ambition. 1 year later. The sun was a brilliant white gold, glinting off the vast blue expanse of Lake Michigan. Marcus stood on the wraparound terrace of his new home, a 4,000-square-foot condominium on the 60th floor of a sleek glass tower on Lake Shore Drive, the very heart of the Gold Coast. He took a sip of his coffee, the morning air cool and clean. The view was endless. The city spread out beneath him like a map of his new life. He had bought the condo for $4.2 million in cash. He had furnished it not with flashy designer pieces, but with comfortable, well-made furniture that felt like home. The walls were filled with art from local Chicago artists, pieces he had chosen himself because they spoke to him. He'd sold the old Toyota Camry and bought a discreetly powerful Audi A8, a car he appreciated for its engineering, not its status. His life was quiet, and it was his own. He hadn't touched the bulk of the sink flow money, which was being managed by a team of sober-minded financial advisors. He had left his consulting job and the endless grind of corporate IT. He no longer had to answer to anyone. Now he spent his days working on projects that mattered to him. He had set up a foundation to provide tech education and resources to underserved youth in Chicago. He spent 3 days a week volunteering at a community center in his old South Shore neighborhood, teaching kids how to code, helping them build their own little computer things. He found a profound satisfaction in it, a sense of purpose that no amount of money could buy. He was building something real, something that would last. He was giving young people the tools to build their own futures, a gift he now understood was the most valuable thing a person could offer. One afternoon, he had a chance encounter. He was at a small coffee shop in Lincoln Park when he saw her, Vanessa. She looked smaller, diminished. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by simple jeans and a worn sweater. Her hair, once styled in elegant twists, was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked tired. She saw him at the same moment, and her eyes widened in panic. She started to turn away, but he gave a small, gentle nod. Hesitantly, she walked over. "Marcus," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Vanessa," he replied, his tone even. "You look good," she said, her eyes scanning his face. "I heard you were doing well." "I'm at peace," he said. It was the truest thing he could say. Tears welled in her eyes. I'm sorry, she choked out, the words raw and broken. I was a fool. A greedy, arrogant fool. My mother. She filled my head with all these ideas about money and status. I thought that was a life. I thought it was what I deserved. She looked down at her hands. You were my life, Marcus. You were real, and I threw you away for paper. He listened, feeling not anger, but a distant pity. He saw the person she could have been before the poison of greed had taken root. I hope you find your peace, Vanessa, he said, and he meant it. For his own sake, the forgiveness was complete. There was no room for bitterness on his terrace overlooking the lake. There was no space for it in the life he was building. He gave her a final nod, then turned and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving her in the shadows of her own choices. He stepped out into the bright afternoon sunlight, feeling its warmth on his face. He was walking toward his future, a future built not on what he had, but on who he was. True wealth is not measured in dollars or in the height of the building you live in. It is not found in a bank statement or an inheritance. Real wealth is character. It is integrity. It is the quiet peace that comes from living a life of purpose and the freedom that comes from knowing your own worth. Sometimes the greatest fortune you can receive is losing everything you thought you wanted, only to discover what you truly need. What do you think is the true measure of a successful life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. And if you were inspired by Marcus's journey to find his own path, please give this video a like and subscribe to Love Beyond Pride for more stories of hope and resilience.